This video is a timely reminder that you should not believe absolutely everything you hear from YouTube photographers. Why is it a timely reminder, you may ask? Well, this video is being produced around Christmas time, the time where people might be getting new cameras, we might be getting new photographers, and they might be coming to YouTube for advice. And yes, I'm perfectly aware of the irony of what I'm saying. A lot of what you hear on YouTube is just opinion. I've got to be honest. And a lot of what I say is opinion. But I'm not the kind of person that's out there to tell you what to do, except perhaps in this video. Because in this video, I want you to question a lot of the things that you may be hearing out there, because not everything is gospel. In actual fact, I mean, it never was it? Yeah, you might have read something in a book or a newspaper. You can't guarantee to rely on it. It's not necessarily, fact. Now, the inspiration from this video came from me watching only a few minutes of a video from a photographer who's got quite a following. And one of the questions he asked was, is aperture priority better than manual? And then proceeded to take the same photograph under manual and under aperture priority and basically compare the two against one another. And this is utterly senseless. Now, if you know the first thing about photography, you'll understand why it's utterly senseless. If not, I'll briefly explain it to you. The difference between manual mode and aperture priority is merely a way of controlling the camera. Under both of them, you have absolute control over the exposure. In manual mode, you have control over both the shutter speed and the aperture, and I suppose also the ISO. I don't consider ISO as part of exposure. I'll go into it another time. And in aperture priority mode, you have control over the aperture, and the camera sets the shutter speed based on the amount of light it's got coming in. But you can change that using an exposure value setting. And normally that's just set to be on a dial. So using exactly the same controls as you would in manual, you have exactly the same control as you in manual as you do in aperture priority. So comparing two photographs of the same scene, one in aperture priority and one in manual, it's crackpot, because the photographer still has control over the camera. They might choose not to exert that control. That's a different thing. It's nothing to do with the mode. But of course, if you're a new photographer, you could be fooled into thinking that either one of those two options is better for you. And the truth is, it's absolutely not. You will also come across myriad of videos with thumbnails that say something along the lines of beginner and pro, amateur, pro, pros do this. Don't be fooled. The difference between an amateur and a pro is always that a pro knows what the camera settings do. They know when manual mode is the most suitable for them. They know when shutter priority is the most suitable. They know when aperture priority is the most suitable option to choose for the kind of photography they're doing at the time. Never is any one of them better or worse than the other. They're just more or less suitable for the kind of thing that they're doing. Another statement of fact that you may hear or read that really should be consigned immediately to the BS out tray is that more megapixels are better. It's absolute rubbish. Again, this kind of goes back to what I was saying about the modes. More megapixels means bigger files. More megapixels means that you can arguably print larger. More megapixels means that you've got more resolution. Statement of fact, a 1080p screen is just 2.1 megapixels. Why do we need a 60 megapixel camera? The answer is we don't. This is 20 megapixels. You wouldn't believe it from the images I get from it. Your phone is probably likely 8 or 12, or maybe larger than that if it's in the last 2 years or so. We're not talking about the need for this stuff, because generally the need only exists up here and in the marketing department of camera companies. For the vast majority of people, the more megapixels does not mean it's a better photo. So let's get into an image, shall we? It's nothing special. The The fog that I came out for is lifting quite a lot, and it's still here. There's still atmosphere, which is why this is going to work relatively well for me. But you may be able to see, let's just move you around a little bit. We've got a path leading off down here. We're not interested in this mess in the foreground. We're interested primarily because the path is kind of skirted by these lovely greens and yellows and browns over here, and I haven't yet found a position for this. I'm thinking, yeah, I don't know. It's slightly difficult for me, this, because I spent a lot of time talking about the absolute crap that people might say on YouTube and on forums and such that you mustn't believe, and not really looking for these kind of images. Here's a solid bit of advice for you. If you have a tripod with your gear, don't be tempted to just put it out and then plonk your camera on it and then get your photo. One of the best ways of finding this composition in the first place is actually to take the camera off the tripod and start looking through your viewfinder to locate this kind of composition. Just wander around. If I put this onto video, zoom out a little bit, you see as I wander around here, things come into view that weren't there before. So yeah, for example, we've got this puddle down here, and if we don't want that puddle in it, and I don't know that I do, we can reframe and we can just wander around a little bit and work out what we do and what we don't want in the composition. And you've always heard, if you haven't been living under a rock for the last 20 years, that less is more. This applies very much in composition. Our job as photographers generally, and I'm not telling you what to do, but yeah, if you want somebody else to like your images, one of the things you need to do generally is to simplify the image. So the less that you put in it, arguably the better, because the viewer is in no doubt about what it is that you want them to look at it. It's more a case of, this is what I'm taking a photo of, and I'm not confusing it with anything else. And I've come to the most awkward place to do that virtually. You know, it's a very difficult genre, woodland photography, but you know, when you've got an open space more like this, it's a little easier. One of the things we need to be careful of in complicated scenes like this, or in actual fact, pretty much any scene, but it's even more difficult here, is keeping an eye on what's on the edges of our image, because we can make or break an image by including something that grabs the eye. It just looks a little off. And on this image, I have this tree here. And if I just twist a little to bring it in a little more, you can see how the eye is pulled back from that edge a little. Whereas if I come here and I just kind of break it like that, you see that light area starts pulling the eye. And that is just so important. I've also got the camera up pretty much as high as I can get it on this tripod, so that I have a slightly downward looking view of this. This helps focus the attention more into the center of the image where the paths are running, but it also enables me to keep the sky out of it a little bit too much. And the reason we want to keep the sky out of it is because it's a big bright area, and your eye is always drawn to bright things. So if we can minimize that, then we're in a better position to creating an image that captures someone's attention and indeed holds it, because it doesn't allow their eye to kind of move outside of the boundaries of that image. One of the things you will see internet photographers do a lot is travel to epic areas, but sadly a lot of people don't live in epic areas. They live in cities and they live in towns. Some might not drive. There's nothing wrong with traveling to get great photographs, But by and large, it's not the area that they're going to that is giving them the great photographs. It's their experience, it's their skill, because they would be able to get great photographs whether they travelled or not. And as a newbie, I do not want you to get into this idea, and it's a notion. Don't fall for this trap. You don't have to travel hundreds of miles or get on a plane or whatever it is to get a great photograph. Now, I'm lucky enough to live in an area where I've got woodland that's a 5-10 minute drive from me. I live right on the coast. That's wonderful. But I see these places as boring as you see your neighbourhood. But I've got the eye, I've got the skill to look beyond the boring and to say, that's a nice image. Because I walk around these woods all the time, and honestly, that shot there, I've walked past it countless times. I've never shot it because it's never appealed to me. But today it's changed. Today it's wet. Today there's a bit of atmosphere. Today the colour's there. And these images that are familiar to you on a dog walk or the walk to school or the drive to work or whatever. Yeah, you see these things all the time. The familiarity breeds contempt. You've heard this before. Don't fall in for this idea that if you can only travel to the wonderful Lake District or whatever a wonderful national park is close to you, that if only you could do that, you'll get the great shots. Because if you don't know how to get the great shots, it doesn't matter how far you travel. Yeah, they're just going to be pants, or they'll be the same shot that everybody else can get because it's a honeypot location. And you get there, you get the memory, wonderful, but you come away with an image that you could have seen on Instagram. If you're new to photography this festive season, or whenever it is you're watching this, don't fall into this trap of saying, if only I could get into insert epic place of choice, I would get some amazing photos. Because you can get some amazing photos in your back garden. You can get some amazing photos off of the balcony. Walking 100 yards down your street, there's an amazing image there regardless. Learn your craft before you spend countless hours or pounds or dollars or whatever your currency traveling to somewhere epic, because you need to understand how photography works, and you need to understand how this thing works before you invest heaps and heaps of time and money in other things. If you want some assistance, if you'd like a workshop, I can offer all of those kind of things. I can even offer accommodation in the Norfolk area in England. I have holiday cottages around here. But that's not what this is about. This is about you learning how to take good photos before you invest in trips or more gear. Even this stuff's expensive, and getting another lens or another this, that, and the other is not going to make you any better. The only thing that will make you a better photographer is experience and practice, and there's no shortcut to that, I'm afraid. So, what kind of things should you be looking for as a newbie photographer, or even as a photographer that's perhaps lost their mojo, forgotten their way a little bit? We all lose creativity sometimes. Well, like I said earlier, simple, real simple. The more complicated you make a shot, not only the more complicated you make it for you to make that shot, but the more difficult you make it for anybody else to look at that shot and say, wow. Because the eye doesn't want to have to look at so many things. It wants simplicity. So, you've got a woodland around you or a park. Come on, everybody has got a park around them. Okay, in the Western world at least. Somebody somewhere is going to have a park, a play park. What do you mean, no? You're throwing barriers up, right? Okay, here, simple. You've got a tree somewhere close. Unless you're living in the desert or the Arctic, there's a tree somewhere close. And at this time of year, perhaps one of the simplest things to get an image of is just a leaf. Now, this leaf may be a simple solitary subject on the end of a twig here, but it's not that simple to take a photograph of, because from over here, if I look up at it, I'm looking into a bright area. And one of the things we already discussed earlier on with the sky is that the sky will start taking your attention away. It will take the attention away from the subject in hand, and it will do that very, very easily. So let's make things a little simpler for ourselves. As I've now repositioned the video camera, you can see the effect immediately of placing this on a less confused, slightly darker area. It's fluorescing, it's there, it's obvious. But again, if I look at it from here, everything around it is bright, and that's going to make things a little bit more difficult. What we're talking about here is contrast in effect. So a bright thing on a dark background shows up. We know this, intrinsically we know this, but employing that idea as a photographer takes a bit of thought sometimes. So that's what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be looking for the best way of framing that against a darker background and making an image that's worth looking at. Another thing that photographers on YouTube and all over the place might say, and I've said it myself, I'm guilty of this. I mean, innocently, and I'm sure most people are innocently guilty of it, but this phrase of zooming with your feet, it is bollocks. Zooming with your feet places you closer or further away from the subject. Obviously it does. But zooming with a lens doesn't. It doesn't change the position of the camera. But what it does is changing that focal length from 40 to 150 mil, 70 to 300 mil, whatever it happens to be. Changing that focal distance draws things closer visually. And what that means is they actually become larger in the lens, but not larger in reality. It changes the perspective of things. So as an example, this is our leaf, and in our background we have these three trees over here. And by taking the camera further away from them, of course what I'm doing is I'm bringing those more into frame. And if I then zoom in a little, what I can actually do is completely hide them from the frame, because I'm zooming in on this and they become part of something else. They're not there. Let me show you what I mean. So my distance here is 2.5 foot, something like that. And if I bring this camera closer, you can see that this tree here has become intrinsically closer to the leaf. If I start coming back, you'll see how that distance has changed. And I haven't changed the focal length of that zoom lens. Now we'll see what happens if I change the focal distance of the zoom. That's me zooming out. You can see so much more, including you. Let's come back in. You can see how that perspective changes. It's not so great here. Pull that up a little. There. Where this really comes into play is with a longer lens. So we'll do that. Now with a longer lens, things are very different. I haven't changed the position of the camera, but I've changed its focal length. So this is at 40 mil. As we zoom in, that tree behind has gone entirely, and we've got just the leaf. And because we can work with a low aperture as well, we can completely isolate that leaf and blur the background beautifully. So I hope that gives you a reasonable demonstration how zooming with your feet doesn't actually make any real difference. You just get closer. You're not changing the perspective of the image in any way. Oh, and also, digital zoom doesn't do the same as a zoom lens. It just magnifies something, and often it's absolutely awful. I would never really recommend that you use it unless you've got a lot of data that you can throw away and crop in, because that's all it's doing digitally. And if you're happy with that, I would suggest you do that in post-production and don't let the camera do it, because once the camera's done it, that change is baked in. Yeah, if you end up with an awful image, that's what you've ended up with. Whereas if you do it in post-production, you've still got the nicer quality original image that you can go back to if you manage to completely muff up a digital zoom. One of the other questions that new photographers, new camera users might well ask is, what are the best settings for this? And sometimes there are YouTubers that will produce videos that kind of answer those questions, or try to, but don't be fooled. Because best settings is a very newbie question, and it highlights a simple fact that you don't know enough about photography, the process, the technicalities, to ask the right question. This type of question might be, how do I get a shallow depth of field? How do I throw the background out of focus? And the simple answer might be, well, you use a very low aperture. You open the lens up wide and that will throw the background out of focus. Yeah, but by how much? Because what that answer isn't taking into account is the distance between the lens and the subject, and the distance between the subject and the background. Because the greater that distance, the more that background's going to be in focus. Do you see my point? There's no blanket answer to this. And in actual fact, the simplest thing that I can say to you as a new photographer, or even as a photographer who's been doing it for some time but not necessarily learned anything and just kind of enjoying the experience, it's quite simple. The technicalities of photography can be learned from a book. They absolutely can. In actual fact, one of the best books to learn from is probably your camera's manual, which so few people read. But the technicalities can be learned from books. The practicalities of photography, they're very different. That takes skill, that takes experience, that takes time. And what I don't want anyone to see this as is a kind of boring learning experience, because getting outside with one of these is anything but boring. What I want you to do is I want you to go out for the experience of going out. I want you to go out and I want you to enjoy your time with your camera. What I don't want you to do is go out with this with the explicit aim of coming back with a doozy of a photo, because believe me, it doesn't happen. The hit rate of even seasoned pros is still relatively low. What I want you to do is to go out with this and enjoy your time, enjoy the process. And if you come back with an image that's great, you're on top of the world. But don't expect that. The time, the experience that you're out with this is what you should be chasing. And if you get a great image, fantastic. The great images will come. They just may take a little time. Much of my video here has been created just along this path, or literally just off it. For most of that time, it's been relatively dull. But then the sun came out and it just started really highlighting these birch over here. Absolutely, absolutely beautiful. It's another one of those things that I want you to bear in mind as perhaps a new photographer, is that being out allows you to capture these images. Whereas if you just sit at home and watch videos like this, don't click off, then yeah, you're not outside, you're not collecting the important stuff about the local area. Because the more you observe in your local area, the more you see how things catch the light and different times of day, different times of the year, and things change, the better you will be at capturing that later on. And I can't emphasize that enough. It's so important that you understand not only your camera gear, which I've got over here, and I've set this up for a member's photograph, member video. And if you want to become a member, if you like what you're seeing here, firstly, please click the like button, but there's a join button down below. £5, $5 a month, whatever, something like that, will get you access to more videos, at least one shorter video each week that I hope will be as valuable to you as this is. But hey, don't feel that you have to. Check out my Instagram page, check out my Facebook page, check out my website. All of these links are down below, or you can buy me a coffee as well. And I absolutely live on coffee. I'm not addicted to caffeine or anything. It's something for my hands to do. Something biting my nail as well. You can see I haven't had much coffee lately. Anyway, look, I'm waffling. If you're enjoying the video, click the like button at the very least, and maybe even subscribe. Thank you very much for that. One of the best times to visit the woodlands for photography, well, if you need an excuse to even go to the woodlands, that is when it's been misty as it has today, really quite foggy this morning after rain, basically when it's wet, because the colours, particularly if the sun then breaks through a little bit, but even otherwise, the colours are beautiful. A few days ago when it was dry, you wouldn't have paid a second glance to it. And if you've got your eyes peeled, then looking down at this is one of the best things you can do. Now, a little while ago, I had a bit more light. The cloud cover's come back a little bit, but a little while ago, I had a little more light, and you can see this broken twig here with the lichen on it is so nice. It's just a simple little image looking down at it that it just kind of works against the background because it's contrast. I keep saying this. It is nothing more than contrast. I'm sure if you remember, you're probably sick of me saying this, but contrast is what actually makes a lot of our vision really work. Yeah, we struggle to see things that are kind of low contrast, but when there's a high contrast between things, it really makes a heck of a difference. If you've enjoyed the video and the no-nonsense commentary, please check out these videos that are appearing here. You'll find those very useful too, full of kind of interesting stuff. I'm not telling you what to do. It's all about providing you with pointers and inspiration. You take care, enjoy your camera.